Okay, it's time for a character guide, and today we're going to be talking about Robella. So before we get into the Robella guide proper, I kind of wanted to take a second here to kind of explain where she's at. Currently, she is in the Alva and Helen waiting room, so a lot of her skills do not function correctly. At least she's designed in a way that she pairs very, very well with future characters that we just don't have right now, so keep that in mind. A lot of the stuff I'll talk about is going to be referencing things in the future, which I know is incredibly obnoxious, but like that's just the world we live in. So, just be aware. In her current state, she's usable. She, isn't going to be setting any records for damage. Macchiato will probably still perform better than her in most single target situations. AoE, she does a little bit better, but overall, she's just kind of waiting for future teammates to pair with her. So let's get into the guide proper. If that didn't dissuade you, I'm going to be more than happy to kind of go over how to use her, what setup, what gear, etc., etc. So let's get into that and, transition. Okay, here we are in a combat map. So this is the target dummy. Now, I don't like usually using the target dummy as explanation, but in this character situation, I kind of need a controlled environment that doesn't have a bunch of enemies running around and changing stacks. So just bear with me here for this section. I know it's a boring target dummy, but it's going to get the point across. So Robella, how does she work? She's actually a very simple character that once you set her up, the hardest part is figuring out what you need to do, like who you need to pair her with. And then after that, she's kind of, like I said, she's kind of like on auto drive. So the hardest part is figuring out what teammate you need to use her skill on. So at the beginning of every battle, you're going to use Light of Bond. Now, this pairs her with a teammate, and we're both going to get the Wario mark. I'm going to use it on Macchiato, and we'll explain why in a second. But you'll both get the little W for Wario above your head, and that means you're linked up together. Now, the target of the Wario mark gets a little bit of extra damage, a little bit extra attack boost, and when they attack the target, it will put a stack on the enemy, similar to how Kyohan's Scorch Marks work. If it's a normal attack, it does one mark. If it's a frost attack, it does another. And then when she's in her enhanced state, which we're going to do right now, it adds a third mark. So after you've done Light of Bond, you'll get an extra command. If Radiant Memory is off cooldown, use Radiant Memory. This will grant her a shield, which is kind of redundant on the Frost team, but it also boosts the effects of the Wario mark. So you'll see now they both have it above their head. Whenever the target with the mark does a Frost active attack, so things like support attacks don't count, or an interception attack to a target, it will put mark stacks on the enemy. So, for example, let's use Macchiato's altar. And then we'll use Cold Precision Shot. So this is a targeted attack. So he gained 3 stacks, 1 from it being a targeted attack, 2 from it being a frost damage dealing attack, and 3 because Robella is in her enhanced state for a couple turns right now, which is, like I said, signified by the marked W. We're going to speed through the rest of the team's turns here, just so you can see the rotation, because it gets a little wonky later on. That's kind of why we're here, is I want to explain the weirdness of this. So right when I finish this, the enemy's going to take his turn. So he's got 3 stacks. It can go up to 6 at base. The only other way you can stack this, besides targeted attacks, is with interception attacks. So the boss is attempting to attack right now. Macchiato intercepts. Same thing. Targeted attack, frost damage, and Robella's enhanced state. That puts him up to 6 stacks. Now we're capped. This one's not going to get it any higher. So capped at 6. The enemy's going to continue to take his turn, and then at the end of the turn, Robella will clear the stacks and do a targeted attack on him. Cool. That is her entire gameplay in a nutshell. So there's a couple more things I want to go over, though. At this point, you have 2 options. You can either move the mark around, which you shouldn't need to, or you can use a basic or an alt. Now, the other kind of main mechanic that she has is that she's going to be accumulating these stacks of sense weakness. Once again, if you did what I just showed you and you pair her with the correct teammate, Right now, like I said, the best teammate is Macchiato because Macchiato is the only teammate that does interception attacks. But in the future, it will be Alva. Alva can do 3 interception attacks a turn, and there's no cooldown on the number, or I shouldn't say there's no downtime on her interception. She can, once it falls off, she can do it again. As opposed to Macchiato, who has a turn or 2 of downtime on when she can do interception attacks. So in the meantime, you're going to pair with Macchiato. Unfortunately, there's not any other good targets, but we're going to explain like some workarounds to that in a second. For the rest of Robella's turns, she's either going to be moving the mark around or using basic or alt. So like I said, you're trying to stack these sense weaknesses up, and you get stacks every time the boss gets her interception attack on him. After that, you can just basic attack. It'll get converted to frost, do a little bit of extra frost damage. Cool. If there's multiple enemies, you do for alt. Robella only gets 1 Confectance Index a turn, so this essentially comes up on a 4-turn cooldown because it uses 4 Infectants, so you'll just naturally gain 4 over the course of 4 turns. Now, once again, there are ways to expedite this process in the future, specifically Alva, but once again, that's kind of outside the scope of this guide. So just keep in mind, try and stack your sense weakness as high as possible before using your Howling Cyclone, and then yeah, just basic attack and Howling Cyclone. That's all you're going to do for the rest of the battle. So as we're continuing, Macchiato is going to take another turn. Once again, attack, 3 stacks. Everybody else just takes their turn, doesn't really matter. Just doing this to illustrate what happens on turn 3, because it starts to get a little janky on turn 3 with the current units that are available for this team. Once again, 6 stacks. Robella will clear at the end of the turn, and she'll get 6 stacks of sense weakness. Now, she's capped at 10, so from here on out, it doesn't really matter. Do Howling Cyclone or Ultra Shot, doesn't matter. I said, if you can hit multiple targets, Howling Cyclone will obviously do more damage. Ultra Shot also does a decent amount of damage. This is a little misleading. It says 80% physical, but when we talk about some of her passives and stuff, you'll notice that number goes up a lot higher. Okay, so turn 3. So those of you who've used Macchiato in the past know that this is the turn when her interception attacks fall off. So a base segment Macchiato, segment 0, can only apply 2 stacks. Now, why is it 2 stacks instead of 3 stacks? Well, Robella also has fallen out of her enhanced state from Radiant Memory. So now you're getting 1 stack for a targeted attack and 1 more stack because it's frost. This is the turn it gets weird. Macchiato's not going to do any more interception attacks, so you're only going to get 2 stacks. Now, there is a way around this. If you have Macchiato go first, or more specifically, before Robella and whoever she's going to pair with, you can move the mark around mid-turn. So now I'm going to move the mark over to Deshevia and do a basic banner. And now during Deshevia's turn, she's going to use her, because in her rotation, this is the turn you would use Hero's Code. So we'll use her single target attack. And we'll get another 2 stacks on the target here. Xiaomi, for example, this ult here, this does not count as a active attack. So while it does do damage, it will not count. So actually, I'll rewind it and prove it to you. Just one more. Go back to this real quick, finish it up. So this is a very important concept to understand. I know it's like very wordy and annoying, but it's very important to understand this for a low segment Robella without her best friend. So you'll see we didn't get the extra stack here. The ult went off still from 2, just from the initial Macchiato attack, and now Deshevia also miss out on the stacks from this. So let me rewind one more time and quote fix that. So we'll go back to the way we had it. And there's one more reason why, you'll see next turn, why I would say put it on Deshevia this turn. Okay, so now we have another turn of awkwardness. Macchiato has to use professional tactics. This is not frost damage, so if you were to move the mark back over to Macchiato, she would do 1 stack. We don't want that. So instead, we're just going to use it like normal. We're going to let Deshevia do both her Marzana Sanction attacks. This should do 2, and then another 2 from it. So we got 4 on the target. Now we're going to move the Light of Bond over to Xiaomi. And we'll go ahead and use Alt, because otherwise we're going to start overcapping on Confectants this turn. And then we'll use... This is the downtime, or this is the turn with downtime for Xiaomi. There's kind of nothing else for her to do. So we'll have her use this attack, which works out perfectly, because we needed 1 more attack. And boom, we hit 6. So using this method... you're only going to have 1 turn of 4 stacks on the main target, and every other turn you can have 6, because now at this point we're back to the beginning of the rotation. Macchiato's going to ult, so we can move it right over to her immediately. So this turn she'll have her ult up. She'll also have the attack buff from the Wario mark for this attack. So... And then from here on out, it just rinses and repeats. So we've talked about the complicatedness of moving her mark around. That's like the big skill factor in using her. Everything else is very self-explanatory. Like I said, obviously, if you can hit multiple targets, this attack is going to hit harder than this attack. One more thing I do want to mention with this. So for Light of Bond, moving the mark onto a Segment 1 Macchiato. Segment 1 Macchiato, you have to remember that when she does Cold Precision Shot, she does a double attack. It counts as 2 individual attacks, so it will essentially make double the stacks. If you have a Segment 1 Macchiato, ignore most of the stuff I just said, and you can just leave the mark on her the entire time. Just leave the Unity Bond, the Wario mark, just leave it on Macchiato the whole time, and just have her go town. Now, every now and then, like I said, maybe the turn that she has to do her professional tactics to regenerate her confectants, you might want to move her off of her, so she won't be doing double attacks. But for most of the other turns, she's going to be 4 to 6 stacks all by herself, and it'll be a lot easier to think about. Otherwise, you can do what I did. That's like kind of the min-max strat as far as single target. AoE gets a little... AoE, you want to move the mark to somebody who does who can hit multiple targets. So once again, Deshevia when she's using Marzana Sanction, or well, that's kind of it. If you have Lotta, I guess you could move the mark, the Unity mark to Lotta. Then once again, just hit a lot of enemies and put a lot of stacks on multiple enemies. Robella will do follow-up attacks for every single target that got hit with Inspection. So once again, like I said, if there's an AoE, this is why it's kind of hard to show it in this type of like demonstration, but if you have multiple enemies and you were to AoE all of them with Marzana Sanction and the marks on Deshevia, you're going to get follow-ups from Robella on all those targets after they take their turn. So, oof. That was a long explanation, but like I said, in the future, it's going to get a lot better. The rotation will be put the mark on Alva and don't think about much. Alva would do all the rest, but we don't have Alva. So let's move on to the fitting room here, and let's talk about gear, keys, etc. Okay, all right, let's get this done real quick because I know this video is already going to be like a 20-minute guide. Okay, let's talk about keys real quick. She is one of those characters that has several good keys. The short answer is, in the meantime, we're going to be using the following keys. So you're almost always going to use Guard Vent here. This one applies defense down too. Nobody else on the Frost team does this except Deshevia, and only when she has that key and only when she breaks their stability. So just use this on Robella. It's way less of a headache than trying to get the defense down from Deshevia. Second key, Here, 3rd Gen Neural Cloud. This one is also very good. This is just going to give you attack up when you have the Radiant Rise buff, which should be, I think, 2 out of every 4 turns. Now, this is a relatively rare buff in this team. There's not a lot of characters that apply attack up, so this is a good way to get that. It's not up 100% of the time, but it's handy when she's doing the most amount of damage. And then finally, for the last key is kind of a flex slot. So I have Ultra Shot gives you 2 extra stacks of sense weakness. At base form, this is not needed. In her base form, as you saw, after turn 1, she's going to get 6 stacks. Turn 2, this would give her 8, but then at the end of turn 2, she would go to above 10 when she caps at 10. So this is kind of worthless on a base segment Robella. As we talk about in the fortification section, this is important for her segment 6, but it's a filler. You can use it. It's not a big deal. This one primarily for Gunsmoke once again, or a boss that you need to remove a buff from. I usually let this be handled by other units in the team, but it is an option for her. It's not bad to have. This one, same thing. This is good for some of the game modes where you need to do a lot of moving around. It's not a horrible skill. It's just, once again, for most boss fights and stuff, which is like all the end game, you just don't need a lot of extra movement. But it is a pretty nice key for, like I said, things like peak value analysis where you got to go across big maps. Finally, that leads us to this key, less than a Diner Gate. This key on the surface looks incredibly stupid, right? Like, why would you want to do extra damage or extra shield pierce? Well, let me tell you why. Because once again, she has this key in anticipation of getting Alva. So one of the big things that Alva does, or AN94, for those of you who are not familiar with who Alva is, AN94, one of her skills puts down like a frost orb on the field, and when enemies are attacked and they're by that frost orb, she converts a big chunk of their HP into a shield. Now, theoretically, that really shouldn't do any extra damage, but when you stack it with this, where you're doing extra damage, you're now piercing the shield, and you're doing extra damage to the shields. This now is like a free damage amp. So when Alva comes out, this will be a very important key to run. In fact, you'll probably run this as your 3rd key 99% of the time. But in the meantime, it's just going to kind of sit here on the shelf because there's just not really a lot of enemies that use shields. Okay, let's talk about common keys. Same thing as always. There's a couple obvious common keys that are good. She does primarily 100% phase damage. Everything should be frost. So the usual suspects here, her key, they're not showing here, but there's Deshevia's key, which is artistic inspiration. Where is it? This one's really good. A couple other keys are pretty solid. Main Dancer's Might. I think all of her attacks. Let me just double check that before I say that. So I lied. Only her basic has a ammo type. The alt does not. But it's a solid keys. Just focus on ones that give you like phase damage and stuff like that, or just attack and crit. She is primarily a damage dealer, so. Again, nothing too surprising here. Her key, obviously pretty good, especially if you pair it with higher levels of Oath. Okay, that covers keys. Let's move on to the weapon. Her weapon is best in slot, despite what other people will tell you. It performs better in almost all situations. The next closest weapon is the Svarog. This one is competitive, but it is slightly behind. Now, whether that's worth, and when I say slightly behind, I mean less than 10%. Now, whether that's worth the tickets is up to you. The trait on this weapon is nothing special. The reason people like the Svarog is because the trait on the Svarog, the damage or the defense ignore stacked with some of the other damage reductions, tends to give big numbers. However, this will supersede it in several situations. Other than that, attachments the same as always. Wow, who would have guessed? Phase strike, attack, crit rate. Cool. Next section. Awesome. Thanks, man. Pro tips. When it comes to the remolding pattern, there's nothing special you need to worry about. She has the typical arrangement of 4 Sentinel, 1 Vanguard, 1 Bulwark, flower plugins, whatever that. What are they actually called? I don't even. Blossoms? I don't know. Whatever the actual term is. Nothing too fancy here. As far as what you want to take is for the main damage dealers, I actually would prefer taking the generic ones, Attack Boost and Thronebreaker. Thronebreaker because, once again, the only thing that you really care about is doing damage to bosses. Little enemies will die, just to the team in general. Once again, the only time you need to min-max is for bosses. And she has kind of a weird split damage profile, right? Like, her basic attack is... Oops, wrong one. Her basic attack here is a targeted single target attack, but her alt is an AoE attack, so it kind of makes it weird to go heavy into pinpoint or area as your secondary key. So I just keep it generic, attack boost, Thronebreaker. For the Vanguard keys, same thing. Any of these are good, really, but just a generic smite boost for just extra crit damage. It's, you know, always a very solid choice. Okay, let's now talk about fortifications. I'm going to cover this section very quickly because all you need to know is big number go up. She is a nice and refreshing character in that her segments don't really change much about her. They just make her do more and more damage. This is a nice chunk of extra damage. This is even bigger chunk of extra damage. This ability is nothing special. You don't need to worry about this. It's kind of for like non-bosses, and once again, non-boss enemies don't really matter. She gets a pretty significant jump from this as far as damage. These two abilities equate into a big boost in the overall damage. I don't have an actual number in front of me, but you got to remember this affects all her damage. And Frigid Infiltration is one of the other main sources of her damage. So, significant. Same thing here, more damage. This is finally the first one that changes her playstyle in any meaningful way. And it makes it so that Radiant Memory can be up all the time. It turns this onto a 4-round buff with a 3-round cooldown. That's fantastic. You're going to spam it. But once again, we're 5 segments deep to get that. And once again, it doesn't really change anything about her playstyle. It just makes it so that you can have this buff up all the time. But that's the only thing that's actually different. You're still going to use... you'll still use her normal skill, Light of Bond, get the extra command, use Radiant Memory when it's available. So nothing as far as like changing like who you're targeting or anything like that. And then finally, segment 6 is just Unga Bunga damage big. Sense Weakness can stack unlimited number of times. The more you stack, like for example, the more times you hit the enemy, the bigger the stack number gets. The more stacks you can accumulate quicker. So this can get out of control really quick. This can cause her alt to hit for million plus damage. It's not uncommon to see screenshots of her alt critting for more than 1 million. This is a big damage boost. This is what turns her into the actual like main damage dealer on the team. But I mean, we're talking about segment 6 here, right? That's kind of expected. So, but that is the nice thing about her. If you do like her as a character, investing in her base form, she's not going to be, you know, cleaning out enemies and like just topping damage charts left and right. But as you buy more and more segments for her, she's going to get and start to overcome and outscale many of the other characters on this team. For example, a segment 6 Robella will do more damage than a segment 6 Macchiato in a single target situation and in an AoE situation. So she is a character that heavily scales with investment, which is fantastic. Okay, I think we've covered literally everything we need to know about her. We've talked about keys, weapons, everything. I think that's going to bring this guide to a close. We already talked about pairing her up. I highly suggest in the meantime pairing her with a segment 1 Macchiato. If not, wait till Alva, snag both of them. I'm going to guess Robella is going to rerun about the same time Alva is going to come out. So you can always kind of delay getting both of them till the same time. And then after that, we're going to have another character, Helen. She also pairs very well. She can help reduce cooldowns on teammates, and she's just a very good unit to round out the team. But in the meantime, we're stuck with good old Macchiato. So, like I said, segment 1 makes a big difference. And that's going to wrap this guide up. Thanks you for watching, and I will catch you guys in the next guide. See ya!